Hello and welcome to the HuMan Podcast, episode number 4. The mind is your house. Now, just to utter those words, I know for many listening, you might beg to differ, and that's okay. That's exactly what we're going to address today. Why it's, first of all, so important to understand. Second of all, because there is a lot of spiritualization of simply bad philosophy, bad logic, that doesn't understand the deeper code that is being used to even come up with any thought form, any idea, any stance. So, for example, a lot of the thing you come into encounter when you are dealing with the current state of affairs and much of spirituality and wisdom, quote unquote wisdom sharings and teachings, is you come across the mindset that many people may or may not even realize that they too hold as a stance, as an ideology, which is that the mind is bad, and that you'll hear things like I'm a feeling person, not a thinking person. You'll hear all kinds of spiritualized ways of avoiding this very main point, which is the title and guiding thought, insight of this entire sharing today. This mind phobia, this phobia of mind, even if it's based on the observation that a lot of problems are mind generated, the big mistake that so many make, and myself included until I got wiser, was that the mind is the problem. So you'll hear a lot of teachers out there talking about how to get out of your mind and into your heart, how to stop thinking, how to, still your mind, silence the mind, get out of your head, all of these different phrases, which are based again on the observation that there is indeed mind-generated issues. But what malpractice to just jump to the conclusion that the mind is the problem. That old saying, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Well, in this case, that sweet baby is your brain, your mind. I didn't mean to say brain because I do not believe that the mind is a product of the brain. I think that a brain is an aspect of the mind. So we make the mistake of putting the mind inside of the head. And there is indeed a heady version of the mind, to use that word heady when somebody's in their head, or you might even say you're thinking too much, or, any form of that way of seeing mental processes. Because the mental process has been so characterized by so many pathologies and so much limitation in our ways of thinking that we make the grave mistake of throwing away the baby, which is mind, the unbridled mind, the mind that is beyond the confines of the very compartmentalizing and limiting code that has taken over the mind. So in previous entries, I have indeed spoken quite a bit about the code, and I use that analogy often of just like your computer. Your computer is just a computer. It's just a machine, but it needs a code. It needs a program to run it. And at the very, very base of that is the digital code, the ones and zeros. So every form of code essentially goes back to binary code, for example. So, and actually that's an incredible analogy for our thinking. So computers and computer and digital code and computer logic and all of that is very much based upon our logic. It's not like we're starting from scratch with a whole different logic with computers. The computers are a progression of us playing out what is already our governing logic, our governing code. And to point out that binary code, it's even just hitting me right now. That's a perfect example of the deepest pathology of the mind, which leads us, it's so deep that it leads us to think that the mind is the problem, the head is the problem, thinking is the problem. But if we can understand that there is different or even higher forms of thinking, unbridled thinking, non-binary thinking, if you will, which you might notice in the culture, there is a deep uproar and upheaval of many beings who are tired of being put in those boxes. And so you hear about, in the LGBTQ, and that acronym goes on way longer than that, that there are a lot of people that don't want to be a he or a she. They want to be a they. And we refer to this kind of as a non-binary identification with your gender and your sexuality and all of that. Just one example there. So it's a very, wonderful analogy, actually, because if we look at the deep code that our entire realm of thinking requires to be running in the background in order for any of it to work, you'll start to observe that a lot of our thinking is binary. And what is that? Binary is division. Binary is dissection. Binary is separation in a pathological way, in a way that is creating distinctness between two separate identities, things, objects, that implies a hard, cold cut between things, men and women, gay and straight, black and white, Christian and Muslim. And we don't realize that even if we might see ourselves as not racist or not prejudiced or, loving everybody, all colors, all races, all religions, but we may still be using that binary code. I'm going to refer to it today. That binary is, in terms of making it, again, a pathological practice, a deep pathological practice of the mind and minding that leads to the divisions, that leads to the either or thinking, that leads to then our all of our breakdowns in culture and between nations and civilizations and all of the calamities that we're seeing now are fundamentally founded upon not just racism. You could say, like, for example, racism or sexism, and give it the name, and that's on the symptom level. And we can easily say racism is the problem, sexism is the problem. But if we can just take it one level deeper, and it's one big level deeper, and look at it not as the symptom, but what if we said sexism, racism, could they have the same code behind them? What's going on in that thinking that is generating this polarity? That's what I mean by many people are making statements and drawing conclusions and declarations about what's going on and what the problems are without having done their homework. Again, back to, the head is the problem. You have to stop thinking and start feeling. These kinds of, again, binary ways of thinking are dead giveaways of themselves. But when you are yourself in the binary thinking, you don't know how to identify that. You don't know that you just got hit with it. So when somebody says you have to stop thinking and start feeling, get out of your head and into your heart, it almost speaks to your binary addiction, and you like that. You want, oh yes, thinking bad, feeling good. And then we don't realize what we're doing is that same old pattern of swinging the pendulum from plus to minus and, detox to retox and positive to negative and all those different versions of that binary thinking. And it's once you develop the vision and ability to detect that and see that, it's a dead giveaway. You see it and it's like, oh my God, there it is, right? So you can imagine, and I've been practicing this for quite some time. And so I've grown a great sensitivity and awareness of it. I often refer to seeing the seeing, okay, or minding the mind, thinking about what the thinking is. In other words, taking that next step back to look at the looking, is something that is not being brought out very much. We're just looking, and people are thinking, and people are talking, and people are sharing, and people are teaching, without this deeper awareness, this deeper understanding. And I'm not inventing it. I'm doing ontology, science of being, philosophy, the love of wisdom. These are in their truest sense, in their scientific sense. They are the original sciences from which all science can even operate or work. Because what science is doing is using a code. And if you look at that, you understand that logic governs science, because science wouldn't work without logic. So there's an obvious point, but it needs to be said, because then we can go, oh, well, what's the science of logic? Well, that's ontology. That's because the logic is our being. In other words, and this is coming to the main theme, the title, your mind is your house. And if you don't know what the structure of that house is founded upon, in other words, the thoughts that create the feelings and your perceptions and your interpretations, and then you are essentially, I'm hesitating to use intense words like victim, because you may also have good feelings that come from that at times. Like positive thoughts feel better than negative thoughts, but they're founded upon the same structure, which as a whole is not freedom. It is not truly liberation, agency, freedom. So when you start to understand that every single moment is being governed by a code that makes it possible for you to think in this, what I'm calling out right now, in no uncertain terms, a pathological way. And there's a whole scale of deeply, obviously pathological, sociopath kind of level of pathology, insanity, schizophrenia, all these different, things that we can point our finger at as symptoms and go, oh, that person has mental issues. I'm fine. See, look at me, look at my life. I'm a nice person. I do everything right. I make mistakes sometimes, but, I'm basically a happy person, and I laugh, and I'm good to other people. And so I'm fine, but those people aren't. And I do believe there's a part in many of us that almost enjoys having that person that's worse off than us, so that we can go, oh God, I'm glad I'm not them. But that's sort of a synthesized and artificial way of making yourself feel okay, because to face that you too might be as sane as you may be relative to the obviously insane. If we can step back from the whole picture and realize in the big picture sense, the whole enchilada is insane, and that I too am participating in an insane, let's just call it, it's nothing personal. It's just that binary code is not conducive to sanity if we are to be coexisting with the big picture, nature, each other, other creatures, other beings. We have to deal with the ecology. It's plainly clear right in front of our faces that we are obvious. There's some deep malpractice going on, because we can see the destruction and the pollution and the violence everywhere, even to varying degrees. So it's not just out there. You might have had a moment this morning where, encountering your partner or your child, for example, is a great example, because children are more natural. They haven't been engendered and encoded so deeply into this binary either or way of thinking that us adults have gotten used to. So when they're just being themselves, how often does that rub us the wrong way? And I'm working on this deeply with my son as well, because he's a constant teacher for me. Because when a child is not fitting into that they're not a master yet of thinking like everyone else thinks, then they can seem as a nuisance or an inconvenience, and you can say, hey, and you can quote unquote discipline your child in a way that has a twinge of violence in it, in the sense of not hitting or yelling or screaming or cursing necessarily. Those are obvious versions. But what if we imply a subtle sense of, hey, you're not okay? What if we imply, get with it, kid? those are little moments of violence that make the child feel less than acceptable, less than loved. And that's a form of violence. It's an intrusion. I'm trying to find a word that's less intense than the word violence, because we associate that so much with blood and killing. But it's a form of abuse. It's a form of condemnation, judgmentalness, that we may all be partaking in some form or another as we ourselves contend with this deep polarity in ourselves between, say, our more natural, childlike aspects, which we have learned through our societal conditioning to suppress and oppress or compartmentalize and inhibit. Okay, we learn how to inhibit our nature. So this is a product of coming into a culture that is governed by this deep pathological form of thinking, this either or thinking, this black and white thinking, this plus minus thinking, positive, negative, all of that. And we learn that. And from the time we're very young, we're just constantly being bombarded by it until we learn how to self-manage in a way that's not really healthy. It's more of an inhibition, suppression. It's more of a suppression than a healthy. Let's say that there's healthy inhibition, like an appropriate inhibition. If someone doesn't have any inhibitions, it can be extremely, obnoxious and inappropriate being around each other. There's an appropriate and healthy inhibition of ourselves. However, if that inhibition is more of a strong arming of one's feelings and one's heart, this is what I mean by your house is your mind. When I say the mind, I'm talking about the deep mind. And I'm not talking about your house like your physical house at your physical address is the physical house for your physical body that you live inside and you sleep inside and eat inside. And you dwell inside this house. But I'm not talking about the body per se. I'm talking about the being that you are. Now, this is where the lines start to get blurred because it sounds like I might be leaning into something that sounds woo-woo because it's not scientific. And, of course, all science can say is that the body is a product of, the sense of self, identity, consciousness, life is a product of the mechanical body. So science has, in strong arms, to be honest, a mechanical, materialistic view of reality. Again, borrowing from that code, that deep code that allows us to think in such ways. So spirituality versus material science, materialism versus spiritualism is one of the great binary splits in our culture. So, and we might even feel that within ourselves. Like, I believe that there's a higher power, and I love, praying to angels, or I believe in God and all this, but just logically, and what I see all around me is that things are just machines and everything's mechanical and it's just stuff, it's just stuff that's made of smaller stuff, and it's all just stuff colliding and collecting and gathering and organizing in different ways and shapes and forms. And what do you know? Life pops out of that, which in itself is a grossly, incomplete model to just say, well, the best that we can see is that there's stuff coming from the universe, from the Big Bang, and countless exploding stars making all these elements that are colliding, and life came along, and anyways, and we move on. When anybody who's really in touch with deeper logic, even not being aware of it, a child could have a problem with that model and be like, wait, something's missing. How does life just come out of things colliding? That doesn't sit right? But we just go, yeah, but it's the best model we got, so just you know what I mean? Because again, there's that binary thinking. It has to be one or the other. Is it matter and then consciousness, or is it consciousness and then matter? Boom, there you have it. So we're thinking of the body again as a kind of mechanical machine thing that's generating the illusion. Honestly, is all it could be seen as. We talk about somebody seeing things that aren't there is hallucinating, but the same mentality would imply then that to think that there's even a being there is an illusion, because there is no being, there is no consciousness. It's just a bunch of chain reactions that create the appearance of animated beings that think that they are in control. It brings to mind the TV show on HBO, Westworld, where they've got these robots that are so real. And you can do anything to these robots and not feel bad. You can kill them, you can shoot them, and you don't have to feel bad because, why? They're just things, they're just objects. But then, of course, that line starts to blur, and these robots start to rebel. I don't want to give too much away about it, but it serves the point here hugely, because what makes us think we are alive? And what does it mean to even be alive? Who is it that thinks she is alive or thinks that she is a being? So in other words, we just come into this world. We don't have any of these ideas. We learn them, by the way. When we learn these ideas, like, oh, I'm a body, I'm a person, and you learn the ideas like, oh my gosh, I can perish, I can die. And you start to get those ideas, oh my gosh, mom and dad could die, brother and sister can die, people I love can be here and then gone, and we get these ideas. And we are interpreting all of this through our binary pathological either-or thinking, which another big binary is life and death. So death becomes the enemy of life. And we want to identify with life good, death bad. And we start to, and that's like, let's just make that the kind of core, deep belief, which you feel in your body. You feel it emotionally and viscerally. And what makes us value, say, like a person more than a robot? And for some, a person more than animals. We think that animals, some people think that animals just don't feel like we do. So it's okay to catch a fish and eat it because it doesn't have emotions, or it doesn't think, it's not aware, it's not smart. Okay, so think about how we have this kind of scale of valuing some things and not. And of course, we want to value life. It's wrong to kill a person. But, if you need the meat from that cow, you can kill that cow. It's fine. So and who decides where that line is? And of course, there's all kinds of collisions there too, with vegans who are saying it's not right to use any animal products. And you have people saying, well, no, I get not killing any animals, but I can use honey. Come on, I can have butter. I can have cheese. Then you've got all these different collisions of ideologies and ideas. But what's governing all of that, again, is the polarizing of binary code thinking, is what I'm calling it today. And I'm really enjoying kind of running on that theme, because I was speaking about the computers, and it just hit me that the binary code that governs the computers is not didn't start with computers. It started with us. We're already in binary thinking, and it's just spilled into the physical technological computer age. Actually, the binary code started with the loom, I believe back in the 1800s or sometime before the 1900s, where they figured out the loom was the first kind of binary code industrial machine that would weave threads together to make fabrics and stuff. And so that was the birth of the computer, amazing enough. So I'm just making that link there so you can see that it's coming out of our thinking. But then we've got all of these different ways of trying to divide right and wrong, another huge binary. Where's the line between right and wrong, and pro-choice and pro-life, and all of these different ways? It all comes down, it's all governed. There's all these varying ways to look at it. And yet it's all governed by the same fundamental way of thinking, that if we're not aware of it, then it's not only our house, it's our prison. Because it literally governs and informs every single interpretation, every single decision that comes from that interpretation and accompanying perception and then feeling. Back to that theme of feeling that I was touching on a moment ago. When we feel something, that's when it matters. That's what I was trying to say, is that between a computer doesn't feel, it's just thinking, so we can kill them. That's Westworld. It doesn't feel, it doesn't actually have feelings. We can simulate that it thinks it has feelings, and some of them will you can program to have pain and all this, and emotions, or seem to have emotions, but then you can just say freeze all motor functions or shut down the emotional response, and it'll just do that, and it's a computer again, and you go, okay, it's just a computer. But the everything that is thought, perceived, is felt. If you have a perception, it's not, you don't have to look far for this, by the way. If you're watching a movie and the movie is scary, you have the emotion, the feeling in your body. If you're watching a movie and the music is moving and the scene is sad and you start to cry, you're having the feeling, the experience, and it's this quality that we go, that's what it means to be human, to feel. And we always talk about, I don't want this feeling to go away. Oh, that was the worst feeling. We're always putting feelings at a really high place in terms of what matters to us. That makes me feel good. I want that. That makes me feel bad. Don't want that. But then we become a slave to the dangling carrot of the good feeling and running from the specter of bad feelings. And we become, again, enslaved, imprisoned to our own thinking. And we literally don't know how to be outside of that prison until we can begin to take that next step back that I'm asking you to do now with me, to see the seeing, to think about or think on the thinking. Do some deep ontology, deep logic with me, and the deepest logic can see the logic that we're using. Logic has to look at logic, has to see, has to be logical about logic. And that's all I'm asking. It's actually a very logical thing to do. When you realize, though, that we're not doing this, not largely, and I'm never like to make blanket statements, but safe to say that largely in every realm, from spirituality to religion to science and any other realm of life, most of us are not doing this. So what does that mean? That means that everything we perceive, we're taking at face value. We're not going, well, this is what I'm perceiving, but it might be inaccurate or incomplete. This other person's perception is different than mine. That's all we can see. This is my reality. Well, that person's reality is different. And since we cannot dislodge ourselves from our own lens of interpretation, that other out there becomes an object of opposition. Again, a process, progression of binary thinking that creates that, and the other person, instead of becoming a thou, another just like myself, which is the deep code of not just Christianity, but all great religions and all cultures have some form, like in the African Ubuntu, means I am because you are, I am because thou art. Or, the golden rule, treat others as you yourself would want to be treated. And that's like a rule that it's not about following the rule. It's about recognizing the deeper code of nature, where everything co-arises, everything coexists in harmony. And one might say, well, when that lion's taking out that gazelle, that's mean, right? We can see that, but we're just projecting our way of thinking. It's not an act of meanness in actuality, but we can see that and go, oh, I don't like that. And we, a part of us becomes the gazelle and a part of us becomes the lion. And there's another polarity, another binary product, lion bad, gazelle good, or maybe for some people's lion good, gazelle bad, or, gazelle food. So I'm just trying to help you, because if we don't even know that that's going on, if we don't even know that there's an interpretation process that is made possible by this deep code, then we can only be a slave to it, imprisoned by it. So our house, when I say the house, I'm saying the house of your being. Now, your being is not your body. Your being, and I don't even want to say that your being is your mind, but your being is that which is experiencing all that you are experiencing. Your being is housed within the code that you partake in. And we can connect the dot here to the ancient biblical story of Adam and Eve and the symbology there. If we kind of take what I'm saying now and look at that as the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, plus and minus binary code. What if we just take away the metaphorical imagery and just look at it, the commandment of reality, I'm going to use instead of God, is, hey, if you use binary code, if you partake of that fruit, if you stay there, if that's where the way you give your being and your mind and your consciousness to that code, you will suffer. It is in self-condemnation. It's not that God was shaking his finger saying, you guys better obey my rules, obey daddy's rules. And if you break them, I'm going to kick you out. So you better do what I say, which is how we all hear it at first, and then it's the evil snake of temptation. Well, that snake is the symbology of the temptation of, the illusory sense of control. So that's the original mind control, is the control of the mind, which is to say the control of reality. Because if you get that, then minding is how you can, change your perception, and your perception is your experience, and experience is reality. Well, if I start to strong arm that and start to take over that, I'm being as God. Instead of, imagine it like kids in the sandbox. And you forget you're in a sandbox. A kid's just in their world, playing in their sandbox in their world, and they forget that there's a world above them, behind them, around them, and you're just in that sandbox. Well, humans, have been in that sandbox for a very long time. And when you're comfy and cozy in that sandbox, it's scary to put down your toys and turn around and look at what's around you. In other words, there's a call to all of us to grow up now. We're being called to grow up out of our adolescent, childlike, self-created. It's like playing make-believe and forgetting that it's make-believe, and now we're in like these hellish situations. And the goal is to try to create a little pocket for yourself where you are safe from other people, and and now it's harder and harder for anybody to feel safe anywhere, because it feels like there's danger everywhere. And just one example there is, like, for example, if we destroy the environment, or if we throw the climate out of balance enough, nobody's going to be, people are going to be experiencing drought, famine, fires, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, pollution, overheating, all that kind of stuff. So no one's safe there. Or say, all the great powers decide that a nuclear war is where it's at, and anybody anywhere can be hit, by that. And I mean, we're realizing that we're not safe anywhere. So in other words, like it or not, as much as maybe finding a little pocket for ourselves, a little corner of the earth to call our own, and you might succeed in that, and it might give you the temporary sense of being kind of, removed from everyone else. The fact of the matter is, just that very mindset of needing to do that is already an unsafe feeling. The only true safety is to find a safety so badass that you could feel it anywhere. And what's that? Well, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, your house is your mind. But if the house is a prison, you don't feel safe. But if we can drop that prison, leave that sandbox, stop partaking of that fruit, and step into this higher intelligence that we are capable of. Now, we've evolved to a stage now, humanity, and there's been a massive acceleration in the last few thousand years. And if we look at the big picture, humans have only been here for a very, very tiny portion of the history of the planet. And then, just these last 2,000 years is a little blink of an eye, really. So things are happening very fast, but we're at a point now where it's time to wise up and snap out of it. And that's a very intense thing to face, and it's what we're all facing. But if we don't face it, we continue to live in this house that is a prison, and we can't leave this house. And we take this house wherever we go. And we might relocate our physical bodies from one town to another town. You might hate the city and you move out to the country, or vice versa. But you bring your house with you. You bring your home with you. And for so many of us, that home doesn't feel like home at all. And when you don't feel that, what's home? Home is to be free and liberated from all of those containers and structures and thought forms that we have generated and built up from the time we were kids about ourselves, our identities, our ways of interpreting and seeing the world. And it sounds like a really big task to ask us to undo all of that. But it's not so much an undoing as much as an upgrading, like a liberating, because there is a death. There is a deconstruction. There is. And I feel like I have to apologize for that, but it's very good news. Sometimes the best news in a way can be not the best news, not what you want to hear. But there is a deconstruction. There is a reason why Jesus said, for example, unless you die, you can't be born again. And in Zen, die before you die. And there's a number of echoes across the global wisdom teachings that speak to this fundamental and even scientific principle. When I use the word scientific, I mean logic, deep logic. It's a principle of we cannot be free from our prison house and come to our true home without a deep letting go, a deep shedding, a deep deprogramming, reprogramming, rising in order to rise into the butterfly. You're not a caterpillar anymore, but the caterpillar isn't actually dying. The identity of the caterpillar is gone, and when it's a butterfly, but there is a continuum, continuity from caterpillar to butterfly. So we humans are in this process, a continual process that is our lifeline, our faith, our safety in all of this, to make this what is essentially a great transformation, a great crossing that is indeed scary, because we have to leave that sandbox we've gotten so familiar with it. That prison, though it's a prison, has been our home, and our being doesn't remember after a certain while. It seems like, ironically, home is what becomes foreign. And what is home? Home is to be in what I call source, to be in the higher code, to be free of that binary code, is to be in the source code. And the Unum pluribus code, to use the Latin, pluribus is many and unum is infinite one. And so in many one, e pluribus unum, is one way of speaking of this higher code, which does not pit diversity against unity like our binary code thinking does. Pluribus versus unum. It's either or. Either we're all one or we're all different, but we can't be different and one. Well, that conclusion is a product of our thinking, our binary thinking. So imagine being free from that binary thinking, pluribus unum, diversity, rich diversity and difference in our ways of being in this world, and yet a love so big, so grand, so infinite that it can hold all that difference in harmony, in love, in peace, in caring. That song, though it may seem cheesy to us now, the Age of Aquarius, harmony and understanding, truth and love abounding, and all the whatever the lyrics are, it doesn't have to be this kind of like cheesy hippie thing. It can be the most badass thing that's ever happened on planet Earth. Imagine us being able to be so different from each other, and we can have our heavy metal and we can have our rap, and we can have and I'm just using music as an analogy, and we can have all these different forms of being that are very, very different. And some people love that, and some people I just like classical, I like new age, I like this, I like that. And some of us like a whole wide spectrum of it. We can go into all these different places, but it's all music, we're all together in music, and loving each other really is, not a matter of just saying, we just got to love each other, man. We just got to be, we're all one, man. It's not enough to say that, even though it's true, yes. But it's not enough to say that. We have to see what's interfering with that, because anybody can say all you need is love, and come together, and I love the Beatles. I love John Lennon, But I'm tired of imagining all the people living for today. We need to go beyond imagining now, because imagining isn't working. What we have to do is get more badass and become more warriors of consciousness, in the sense of not violent warriors, but warriors in terms of wokeness, being super duper woke about our own thinking and our own code, our own coding, our minding our minds, and seeing our seeing, and starting to, in a healthy sense, dissociate from the lens that we've called our home. The mind that we've called our home for so long. If we don't know how to detach from that, we can only be reactionary. We can only be another domino in a chain reaction. There is no agency, in other words. If you don't know that you have a lens, and that lens is your mind, and your mind is your code, and that code is something that we're all sharing deep, and it's old, and it's had us captive for so long, and we can't even say that or see that, then you can talk about awakening till you're blue in the face. You can talk about enlightenment, healing, wisdom, love, stop thinking, positive thinking, all these different forms, and you're just going to be contributing to the pile of fragments and shards of discoherent perspectives and opinions that have no clout or validity really in the big picture, except for that it might speak to a certain demographic, and you can put some money in your pocket and get a bestseller because you're doing what you're just doing what you need to do to get to the next block on the game board, as I spoke deeply on in the last episode. You're just getting to the next game board. If we have to be honest with ourselves, are we strong-arming? Are we using spirituality and using wisdom, just like any other resource, to our own ends? Is it enough for us that we're just, making people happy right now in this moment? Or is there something more badass that needs to happen? Something where, and I know this is true, if you really feel into it, you can see and sense the futility of where things are at right now in all of our forms of trying to better ourselves, right? It's a form of activism, self-activism, activism on oneself and one's own life, which is still addressing the symptoms with the same code of thinking that generated those symptoms to begin with, thereby, even though the intention is good, to get better, to get healthier, to get happier, to, get more peaceful, or whatever it might be, like the mindfulness movement stuff, if you're not super woke about it and aware of your code, you're going to be really pouring more gasoline into that engine that's burning itself out. And that's depicted in everything in our culture. Most of our technology seems to have that mentality. So even our technology is picturing it. The cars, you fill a tank of gas, it creates pollution, but oh well. And even if it's an electric car, you're taking that and you're grabbing that electricity from something that's creating pollution also. And even if you use solar, what's operating those solar, if we just look at the big picture and we step back, the whole thing is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, which is an unsustainable, self-imploding mechanism on a global scale that's generated again by this binary code. We have to take in order, and we have to use, and all of that, so that we see the destruction of nature and the unfairness of the distribution of wealth and all of the ways that it appears. We can point our finger at any one of those things, but guys, it's time to wise up and see that they're all connected to the same exact generating code, and that's where it comes home to each one of us. Home. And your home is your mind and your lens. And if your lens is governed by this and you don't know it, you're not home. You're in prison. And you will be running and running and running away. But you can't get away from yourself. Run away from yourself, I think the lyrics are, from Bob Marley. That guy had a lot of wisdom coming through. But that's what I'm saying here, But we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. There's another big chunk of wisdom from Bob. That's what I'm speaking to. It's mental slavery, but it's not just mental slavery in the form of, let's say, Christianity, or in the form of atheism, or it's not any one of them. This is really good news. This is the good news. There's no one to point the finger at. Because it's not any of those structures that have been built upon the foundation of our binary thinking. It's the binary thinking itself, the objectifying, dividing, fragmenting, compartmentalizing, discoherent making, incoherent making code that we're using that is being outpictured in all of the pathologies that are appearing from the personal to the global levels. So this is amazing. This means that, well, okay, imagine if this awareness starts to spread to everybody, and everybody starts to look at the woman in the mirror, the man in the mirror, in this sense of stepping back from your lens and stepping back from your foundational code and going, oh my God. And in that, we begin to go through the graceful transformation that is required, that will then be outpictured in myriad ways, in all the ways that we want to see change. But we're not going to be doing it with all of the strength we can muster up and all of the determination we can muster up to go after the bad guys and tackle those problems out there in the world and go for it, even though the intention is so beautiful. It's like, oh, that is so awesome of you to be willing to sacrifice yourself for this cause and to make it better. But if you are burning all of that good intention and energy on something that's not doing much more than buying us time and fighting the current that's moving the opposite direction, then we're exhausting ourselves with that really good intention. I'm not putting down the activists. I'm trying to help the activists who are the ones who are willing to put aside their selfish desires to go for fixing the problems. I am celebrating you. What I'm suggesting is that perhaps that isn't the way that we go about that, may not be the best way to shift the world. It doesn't mean you don't go out there and feed the hungry. It doesn't mean you don't go out there and stop child trafficking. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean we're stopping what we're doing. But again, it's where we're coming from. It's the house we're living in. Because if we're not aware of it, if we don't realize that these problems are all connected by this deep foundational code, where again, we're pouring more fuel on the fire that we're trying to put out. And so there's a deeper intelligence is what I'm trying to get to. The butterfly version of the human is operating at an intelligence, a coherence level that is superior to the caterpillar level of human consciousness that we've all been in for so long, and it's so familiar that we don't know how to see it because it's what allows us to see everything. It is our lens, and then our lens is our house, and so we live in it. But once we start to dislodge our being from the confines of that limited lens, we are incapable of really coming up with that higher intelligence solution that, like everything in technology that advances, it uses less energy, it creates less pollution. It has less moving parts. It becomes lighter. It becomes thinner. It becomes, right. You see that there's a natural movement towards the simplification and the more efficient use of energy, where it's almost we're driven to become more like nature. Like our solar panels are trying to imitate the leaves of a tree in a way. The leaves on a tree are solar panels, and what they're collecting per square inch is going to be so much more efficient. So what I'm saying is that it's like our technology wants to advance towards nature, towards the natural intelligence, but it's thwarted and inhibited and held back by our addiction to this objectifying binary way of thinking that governs our science and technology hugely. And we have to free our mind technology in order to free technology. Right? We have to graduate from our binary stage. So that's how I'm choosing to say it today, and I hope there's many, many more ways that'll come through. I'm sure there will be. But today I really wanted to convey that primary idea for the individual listener. Listen, you can be sitting there and buying into the automatic perception. I am a person that has a body that's alive right now, that needs food and air and water, needs these ingredients to stay alive. And here I am, and I just need to make sure that I keep making those things happen, and that I put my body in a place that I like. And I want to like the surroundings, and I want to like the people that are around me. And I'm going to try to seek out the things I like and not the things I don't like. And that's totally normal. We're trying to get to what we want and away from what we don't want. But we're enslaved to that because we're in the meantime so used to that prison form of thinking that we don't realize that we are now. You can't be happy anywhere. You can be happier in some places than other places, but even that happier doesn't hold a candle to the sunshine of what I'm speaking for, which is this liberated mind space, a mind space that is not a prison. But that takes work, guys. I mean, and if there's something that's worthy of working on day and night, it's this. It's exactly what I'm speaking of. It's seeing your seeing, minding your minding, getting wise to the deeper code of what's going on in your consciousness, and being able to see that in action. Because if we don't, it's behind our eyes, to put it that way, and so we don't know it's there. We're driven by it. And on the deepest level of our being, the place where bliss can be felt, real bliss, is, imagine it like a fight, flight, and freeze response. Imagine that most humans are in a freeze response. On the deepest level, our beings are coiled and curled and buried in the cocoon of the protective outer shell that we needed to create and build up in order to live in this world and deal with each other and deal with quote-unquote reality as we see it. But ironically, that cocoon has encased us and anesthetized us to reality as it is. And that's painful, and that's a prison. So the cocoon, it's time to shed the cocoon, and it's not to curse the cocoon. It's, the cocoon is a necessary stage for the cultivation of the and birthing and growing of the butterfly. So think of it in that analogy. We've created this cocoon, but the cocoon, to stay in the cocoon, is dysfunctional now. And that's what we're seeing. So the way that we can get out of the cocoon is see the cocoon. Start to see what keeps us in that. And let's graduate from it. And if each of us takes full responsibility for that, and if we're teaching others, we're putting first things first. Yoga is great, guys. I love yoga. I teach it. Yoga is great. Meditation is great. Mindfulness practices are great. All these different modalities and systems that help us feel better are great. Keep them going. Don't stop, but upgrade them and put first things first, because otherwise all of those great things that we're offering are just coddling us and holding us in the same place and making us feel better. It's like I call it the hot tub principle. I realized my yoga class, I was calling it a hot tub yoga class because, you're coming to the class and I guarantee you're going to feel better at the end. You're going to come in and you're going to just bask in the good, the dance massage that we go through, and you're going to breathe deep, and you're going to let go of your cares and worries, and you are going to leave that yoga room feeling so high. But then you're just going to go back. It's just a matter of time. And what that'll do is it'll make you feel better for most of the rest of the day or a couple days, and then you're going to need it again. Just like you need like you go into a hot tub, and your hot tub helps you relax, and you put on the jets, and it's like, oh, it feels so good. And you get out, and you're like, I'm so relaxed. Yay. This is what life's about. And then next day you're like, oh God, I need a hot tub, Well, what if we could get to that place? Again, we're not trying to get rid of hot tubs. Keep your hot tubs. Keep your yoga, keep your massage, keep all of it. But what would happen to all of it if we got down to the real culprit, the real perpetrator of our sense of peace and relaxation, our deep relaxation, our bliss? What's really violating our bliss? And that's what and ironically, it's our own home. It's our own house is our prison. And our house is our mind, and our mind is our code. And we've been partaking of that fruit for a very long time. So it's hard to let it go. We're addicted to it. We're so addicted to it. It's how we operate. We don't even know that there's an addiction. That's how deep it is. It's just literally the ground floor from which we operate and build. So we're talking about getting to the ground floor here. That's some serious badass stuff, guys. Like, we can get to that level, like, together and support each other and start to see on that level. I bet you there'll be a lot less noise really quick. I had a gathering the other night, that of like-minded people, but there was a sense of colliding voices. Now, this is something I'm sensitive to, other people aren't. Trying to validate their perspectives, and even though everything that everyone was saying was right and good and positive and awesome, there's a sense of needing to validate oneself. I'm sure you've experienced this before too, where everyone's wanting to, and we're trying to validate ourselves on each other. And even though I wanted to participate in the conversation, I opted to stay more silent for most of the night and just listen and witness, because I realized a lot of what we're saying, again, is we're missing this foundational point. And once we get that, and we start to discuss on that level, I know the discourse of dialogue will change and shift deeply. Because right now what we have is dual monologues. Dual monologue is not dialogue. It's a duel of minds. And even if we're agreeing, it's still different, cocoons, talking at each other, taking turns talking, is not what dialogue is. Dialogue is deep listening, which we can't do if we are embedded within our lens and our lens embedded within us, which is not just the lens of the eyes, it's the lens of the being, the lens of the eyes and the ears and the everything that you experience and feel and think, perceive. So we can't have dialogue without getting this main point. So I guess in the end, what I'm saying is that I'm asking you to leave your house. I'm asking you to step out of your house, to the house that has been your quote unquote home for a long time, because it never was home. Home is way more expansive and free and safe than the container, the cocoon, the sandbox, the lens that we've learned to create and generate and become. So this is a very, very exciting prospect here. And as these meditations develop over the coming months and years, and if you really follow them, you'll start to connect the dots. And it's in that ability to start to see outside of the boxes, outside of the box, outside of the lens, outside of that house that you're so used to. That's where you get the Unum, the infinite unifying power that allows us to even connect anything at all. Every little thing. When I say I am a man, I'm doing nothing more than connecting 4 separate pieces together. But they would not be able to make sense if they were not tapping some deeper resource, the Unum, in order for it to make sense, in order for it to be coherent. So I'm asking you to really step out of the statements and see, the ideas, the statements, the ideologies all together, the ideological space. And that's where we bask in the Unum with potential infinite connectability, interconnectability, infinite sense, ostensibly, if we are to allow ourselves to unplug from what's grown so familiar. And that's our home. Unum is our home, or is our real home. The infinite is our real home. Outside of these scary ideas of life versus death, these scary ideas of linear time, that haunt us our entire life long. These ideas that can only be generated by the fruit of binary code. the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so to speak, plus and minus, either or, is the generator of some pretty scary stuff that we have to contend with, and maybe not on a conscious level, because what most people are conscious of are like several layers up from that deep stuff, just the daily, what do I have to deal with right now, and our lives are expended upon this kind of, what do I have to do to get to the next moment, what do I have to do to get to the next day, the next week, the next month, what do I have to do to feel good, what do I have to do to not feel bad, what is it the object of my affection right now, is it a person, is it a thing, is it an accomplishment, is it is it healing, is it getting better, is it quitting alcohol, is it all these things that we symptomatically focus on the surface level, but we don't realize we're not getting down to the core issue. So once we tackle this one thing, and it's another thing, and you tackle that thing, it's another thing, and we think on some level that if we just do that enough, eventually everything will be okay and then we'll be fine. But all we're doing is strengthening that feeling of I got to get there, and that feeling of I got to get there does not feel like home. Right? Because if you're thinking I got to get there, I got to get there, you're also saying I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not here, I'm not present. So we have to be able to take those steps back and see the deeper mantras. Like in acting, they call it the subtext. You know, you've got your actual line that the actor is reading. You know, and the one woman is saying to her boyfriend, she's like, "No, let's not go to the movie. I don't even care." But the subtext is, I want you to tell me that you want to go to the movie. You know, I don't want to have to ask you. So that's the subtext, right? And so I find that a very useful analogy, because a lot of what we're doing has a subtext and a sub-subtext and a sub-subtext. And you go down a few layers, you can go, oh my God, what's this mantra, this deep mantra that I'm repeating again and again? I'm not there, I'm not there, I'm not there. How many of the things that we're doing are springboarding off of that without us even realizing, because we don't know how to stop long enough to go, wait a second, no, I'm not going to be enslaved to that thought form anymore. It grabs us. And so that's not freedom. So we may think we're being free to be able to choose the life that we want, but what if what we're choosing, what we think we want, is not even chosen by us? You know? So it's big stuff. It's big stuff that I'm holding back my laughter right now, because it's also so exciting, because we can just stay there together and help each other, support each other, keep doing that. Let's take those steps back. You know what I mean? And not be pointing the finger at each other and trying to fix each other in the ways that we do when we're trying to fix ourselves on the symptom level. We're just going to be doing that with others too. We always act out externally on others what we're doing to ourselves. But can you imagine if we're all taking that deep responsibility? We're not going to need to do that anymore, because we realize that what we're tapping into is so powerful. This deeper intelligence, this Unum intelligence, is so big and so powerful that it doesn't need to grapple and engage on the surface levels that everyone's partaking on. Sometimes the Buddha is silent, and we are all Buddhas becoming. We're all Buddha flies. That's the butterfly human, is the Buddha fly. And so it's an exciting time where, if you can hear what I'm saying, you don't need to get anybody to agree with you. Maybe share this podcast with them. Maybe if they seem like open to it. But right now, all you need to do is get what I'm saying, because if you get it, you can free yourself from your house, from your prison house, without anyone agreeing to it. Of course, it'd be nice if everybody was like, yeah, let's do this. But the first of us kind of have to be brave enough to do it ourselves. But when you get the deep science, the deep logic, that is your safety net. You know, that it feels scary to stand away from the crowd. It feels scary to not do what everyone else is doing. But when you remember that Unum has got you, Source has got you, the same thing as making your heart beat and your breath breathe, whether you're thinking about it or not, or feeling happy or sad or whatever, you're still held and supported. And you start to fall into that foundation, that's your home. And it's got you. You know, and you don't, and so much of the antics, and what I call them frantics, frantic antics, are all of the things that we do, and we're frantically trying to get better, but being frantic isn't better. You know, we got to come from this calm, this deep place. It doesn't mean it's like this flaccid, like nothing affects me spiritual guy thing that people think it is. It can be deeply excited and exuberant and lighthearted and fun and sexy. It doesn't have to be all of this like pretentious spirituality. I'm so enlightened, nothing affects me, blah, 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 kind of thing. You don't have to pretend, in other words. When you get the science, you get the source code, you don't have to pretend. You're it, you be it, right? So what a huge relief. You go back a couple episodes, The Stress of Spirituality is the name of it. I believe it's episode 2. It speaks to that very point, because if you're not getting the source code here, and you're not seeing, as I called it in the last episode, the matrix that governs our house, that governs, holds us captive, then we can't pretend to be, calm. You can't. You're just going to be stressed. And all of the things that we do to get better is almost like an outpicturing of that stress. So your yoga practice becomes subtly stressful, and your mindfulness practice becomes stressful. And then when you become a spiritual teacher or leader, you've really become stressed because now you have to really be so and so and so and so. Oh, you're a mindfulness leader? Wow, you must be so enlightened. And so now what do you have to do to keep up that facade? And on and on. Right, but the authentic mindfulness is to be mindful, is to be full of the mind, liberated from the mindless, the anti-mind. So don't get out of your head. Get out of your head, but into your mind. Free your mind from your head. Let's put it that way. And don't create this binary dualism of the head versus the heart. And you got to get out of the head and into the heart, out of thinking and into feeling. Stop doing that. See it for what it is. It's a dead giveaway. It's another polarity. You have people who are teaching about non-duality, and then they'll say that in the next sentence. And it's like, do you really understand non-duality? Because you just demonstrated that you're thinking in duality, right? So it takes some serious, continuous heads-upness to stay on top of this, because if we're not heads up, we default into the binary. We default into that dualism. We default into that prison. So it takes a serious and continuous practice of staying woke. So woke is not sometimes woke. Woke is, by definition, continuous. And when we lose it, we don't punish ourselves. We go, dang, well, this is a really big task, But we can do it now, and we can do it. It does take some time, but it's also relatively quick once you get the sense of what it's really about. And you start to heal your mind from your head, your previous head. You start to heal your home from your house. So obviously I could go on for quite some time, but I feel that that's a nice, full addressing of the issue I wanted to speak to today. Your mind is your house. Your mind is your home. So let's mind our minds. That's the only way to be mindful, is to mind our minds and be able to take that step back. And that's where stillness and peace and harmony and bliss really live. And it's right here. It was always right here. So thank you so much for listening. And we'll see you next time. Episode 5, whatever it may be. Adios.